In 2016,
I completed my first marathon. I can remember the crowds of people cheering. Don't you hate it when your phone goes off at the most inconvenient time? Like during your TEDx talk? Well, welcome to my life. That wasn't a text message, a phone call, or even a calendar reminder. I have an app on my phone that allows me to see what my blood sugars are 24/7. Confused yet? When I was 19 months old, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I didn't know it yet, but my life was destined to be very different from other kids my age. Now, before we begin with that story, let's start with the basics. Diabetes takes two forms, type 1 and type 2. In both cases, the body cannot sufficiently control the amount of sugar in the blood. Insulin, a hormone the body normally produces, tells the cells to absorb that sugar. If your body cannot produce insulin, then this sugar stays in the blood. This can damage cells, neurons, and nerves, which is why diabetics get the pleasure of hearing about all of the fun side effects like blindness, neuropathy, amputations, Alzheimer's disease, and even death. For those living with type 1 diabetes, like myself, insulin is necessary in order to survive. Type 2 diabetics can produce insulin, but their bodies are less sensitive to it. They can control their blood sugar levels with diet, exercise, and medication if necessary. Although, if one has poor control, then insulin injections become necessary. Usually, this is the part in the conversation where the person I'm talking to says, "But you're not fat, and you seem so healthy. What does it look like to have a chronic disease?" We tend to have an image in our minds, a picture of what this looks like. Then, when we meet someone, we use this picture or mold to see if the person fits into this. Now, if you saw me, would you think I had diabetes? Looks are often misleading. We can't see what is actually going on in that person's body. There is so much more than what we have on the outside. As the saying goes, looks can be misleading, but we can do something about this. When I was first diagnosed, my parents were devastated. The seemingly long list of complications continued to grow. To make matters worse, insulin injections would become my new best friend, which was probably good because I'm an only child, so we need lots of friends. I don't remember those first couple of years, but I can imagine how difficult it must have been on my parents. They had to check my blood sugar with a needle 6 to 8 times every single day. They had to administer an insulin injection almost 10 times a day. As a new parent, and if you knew my mom, this was a constant worry, especially when it came to doctor's appointments. Each time, I would have to take my average blood sugar levels, or A1C value. This transferred into me going to a clinic, sitting in a chair, and having the nurse attempt to draw an entire vial of blood from my seemingly microscopic veins. Versus today, it only requires a drop of blood, and then it's sent off to the lab. Originally, I would have to endure the pain of being stuck with a needle time and time again, because it never seemed like she would ever be able to get enough blood to test. This battle was always ongoing, and it never seemed to end. But fortunately, the story doesn't end here. A lot has changed. Thanks to technology, there are so many more possibilities. What I tell kids is I'm basically a robot at this point. Instead of having to check my blood sugar multiple times a day or administering an insulin injection, I have a wireless sensor on my arm, which allows me to see my blood sugars 24/7, and a wireless pod that administers insulin. Now, I can control my diabetes essentially with just a touch of a button. Today, I would like to show you what my sensor is and what it can do. This is a screenshot of what you can usually see on my phone whenever you want to. This was a particularly good day, and I felt great at 126. As you can see, it is a fluctuating curve. It's almost like a game. You want to hit that sweet spot, no pun intended, where your blood sugars aren't too high, but also aren't too low. Again, this is one of my good days where it felt great. It was right in the happy medium. In contrast, if the number does get too high or too low, an alarm will sound. And believe me, this can happen all the time, just as you got to experience at the beginning of my talk. The funny part is, if my blood sugar drops below 50, then this alarm will override my phone settings. In other words, you can't shut up your phone. As a college student, this can make your professors think you are either cheating, rude, or both. And this misunderstanding can sometimes lead to jokes about low blood sugars. But often, the situation can be a lot more serious than it seems. So, when this happens, we have to take a step back and examine what is really happening. As your blood sugar is dropping, you experience the typical symptoms like fatigue, drowsiness, and confusion. A voracious hunger develops, and then this civilized human transforms into a bottomless pit, consuming and craving all foods within a 6-mile radius. You think I'm kidding. If left untreated, your blood sugar will continue to fall, and the confusion worsens. I remember a time when I was 7 years old, and my blood sugars were particularly low. At that point, I had a fairly good grasp of what diabetes was, so I knew the drill. I would have to eat something or drink some juice. My babysitter continued to instruct me that I needed to drink the juice, that this is what was best for me. In spite of this, I kept hearing, no, that's not what I should be doing. It didn't make sense at all, but that's how I responded. The paramedics were almost called, but fortunately my babysitter was able to force my mouth open and pour down the juice. This battle, and I do mean a battle, left the room a mess, and me feeling very sticky. As the mind fog lifted, I realized what I had done. My low blood sugar distorted reality to the point where I lost control. The choice to respond rationally was taken from me, but you can take it back. It all starts by learning to embrace a burden. For me, I learned I can control my body. I learned that you can train it to respond in a certain way. I didn't realize what this meant until I started training for my marathon. So, as I was saying before I was rudely interrupted by my diabetes, in 2016, I set my sights on a seemingly insurmountable goal. 26.2 miles. Of course, I didn't have any idea what I was doing, so I did what any normal person would. I Googled it. Marathon training for diabetics? Surprisingly, it brought up a number of different articles and personal testimonies. I wasn't alone. The biggest obstacle was maintaining enough sugar in your body so that you would have energy to continue running. Most of the sites advise a 20 by 20, or 20 grams of carbohydrates every 20 minutes. So that's what I did. Training is mostly trial and error, lots of error. The process is about becoming more attuned to your own body and understanding what works and what doesn't. You learn what your limits are and when to push yourself when necessary. Fortunately, I had my sensor, so I could watch my blood sugars and see what they did and respond when necessary. I learned that without eating anything, I could run about 5 miles before having to stop. I learned that when my blood sugars were about 180, I had to eat something before they would plummet. I also learned that heat exhaustion is real, and I could only eat 4 chocolate gels in one run before throwing up. I also learned that my body was becoming more sensitive to insulin. In other words, you didn't have to take as much for it to have the same large impact. I realized I was training my body in a number of different ways. I was getting stronger, my blood sugars were improving, and my mental endurance was building. When I finally crossed that finish line, I was filled with pride. No one else could take credit for it. Only I could. We all have burdens in our lives, things that make every day just a bit harder. What if it's not harder? It's just different. We're all given the opportunity to impact someone who may be going through a similar situation. In life, it's all about turning a burden into a blessing. Since I was diagnosed so young, I've never known anything different. I simply thought this was how the world operated for me, and I was okay with that. In fact, it shaped how I see life and what I plan on doing with my own. I want to be a physician and be able to create change in people's lives, to teach and empower those around me to see all the possibilities, not the restraints. We are only limited by our perception. Having a chronic disease does not make you weak. It makes you stronger. It forces you to look at problems differently and adapt. There is so much more out there. We need to be challenged. We need to feel uncomfortable. It is at the edge of our comfort zone where we learn, change, and grow. Life is unpredictable, and we can't control what our burdens are. But there is always a choice in how we can respond. Thank you.